to junior to senior, you find that the shortages are also not equitable. So you'll find that senior schools are bearing a heavy burden of shortage. Junior schools have a shortage, but mainly in terms of the learning areas and how the teachers are distributed. But Trevor, when we do research on what matters for children to learn, the teacher is the single most. So that it is better to have a teacher who is good with children under a tree than have a story building that is really nice without teachers or without teachers that are motivated. So the opportunity we have now as a country is to leverage this huge workforce and make those teachers good, and especially discovering ways of and methods of teachers that are teaching large classrooms. There are teachers that have 100 learners, have 90, and there are methods that can work in those contexts. So first of all is to look at areas that are very understaffed. There is an opportunity that we can use in terms of redistributing teachers across the levels, across the learning areas, but also when we are employing, like now, government has announced that they'll be employing 26,000. Ensuring that employment from the hiring, then hiring can be done the right way so that the right places are prioritized for staffing.
Interesting. Let's deal with these issues one at a time. Now let's start with the teachers gap. And Dr. Sugut, I spoke to the PS earlier on, and he had a concern with these numbers. Are these numbers accurate, and are they from the government? That there's a staffing gap of 111,870.
Thank you, Ombija, and good evening, viewers. I think what is critical is that we agree that teachers are very critical in any education system, and they play a very, very important role in terms of ensuring that the curriculum is delivered. But in terms of those numbers, I think we need to go back to it, because the accurate number is that
4,000.
4,000, yes.
So not 472,205.
That is what we have, and therefore the shortage comes to around 40,000. So in that case, then it means if we employ 24,000 this year, and then next year we also employ another 20 or 18 to 20,000 next year, we will really be done. I think what I want to agree with my brothers here is that once we have those numbers, we can therefore look at their distribution to see that we are using them optimally and they are able to reach our children. Otherwise, we accept that teachers are very critical, but those numbers a bit, I think, are not accurate.
So according to you, the gap is 40,000?
Yes, 40,000.
11,000.
And that's what the government is working towards. And I think given the numbers, because we are also concerned, and we are really on top of things to ensure that our learners, our children get education that is quality. And we do agree that the teacher is the single most important factor in terms of performance. It's only those numbers that are not accurate, and we are happy that we are working with them also to be able to really get accurate figures so that they can also appreciate what we are doing in the ministry with regard to what is available on the ground.
So how are you going to bridge this gap, whether it's 111,000 or 40,000, and yet there's no budget allocation for that?
Well, there are plans, and I think through the commission, the ministry, through the Teacher Service Commission, is going to hire another 24,000 this year before December. And then next year, the balance will be hired to be able to address that. Because whereas it concerns stakeholders, even as a ministry, again, we are also concerned. And it is our wish and prayer that we really attain the kind of requirement that we need to be able to deliver quality education.
Okay.
And those are provisions. From the history that we have had from 2022, you've seen we've 46,000 employed, another 20,000 employed, now at 76,000. That is serious commitment. And the ministry is working towards that.
Okay.
Yes.
Dr. Manyasa, what are the possible solutions to deal with this? And are you buying that conversation from the government that the gap is not 111? I know you both co-authored this report. They're saying the gap is 40,000, not 111.
So I don't want to dispute the figure the director has given, but the figures we gave you came from the TSC documents. They were looking at that as the gap. It is also possible that that gap may have reduced because there was recruitment earlier this year. which may have reduced that gap from the 111 that was captured in the TSC's plan to another figure that may not really be 40,000, given that just this June, just this June, 12,000 teachers retired from TSC. So that increases the gap that still needs to be filled. But I'm sure it is not 111, it must be less. That I have to own up, given that, and we made that provision when we were presenting this report. We said this is based on TSC data before January this year. And so the recruitment that happened this year may have narrowed this gap below that number. What I need to agree on with the director and suggest a few things that need to be done is the fact that the distribution of teachers in this country is extremely skewed. We have places where there are absolutely no teachers, and we have places where there is overstaffing. And that is, I'm sure the director knows that. But there are challenges that TSC faces in terms of what it is able to do to ensure this distribution. One of the things that they face as an obstacle is the TSC Act. The TSC Act provides, excuse me, that when you set up a new school, the TSC is mandated to give you a school head. And once they've given you the head, they have fulfilled the requirements of the TSC Act. So they then tell you, we'll give you other teachers when they become available. And that becomes a challenge. In the meantime, you have children in the school without teachers because the Act does not mandate them to ensure equity in distribution of teachers. And I think that is something that needs to be considered for review to make sure that it is mandatory to TSC to ensure equity, and then provide them with the tools by which they can be able to ensure that equity in distributing teachers. There are practices that other countries have. For instance, in other countries, we know that if you work in a hardship area, you're put on a faster career progression path. And that becomes an incentive for many teachers to want to work there. In some other, in the police service, for instance, we know that it is almost mandatory to work in certain regions of this country, what they call the operation zones. Every police officer at some point serves in an operation zone. So it can also be the same case that we say teachers will rotate across the country because you have an obligation to serve all the children of Kenya equally. So it's important to focus on that distribution. I know there is going to be review of school establishment guidelines happening. We have to face that fact that part of the shortage in teachers that we have is because we have a proliferation of schools that is almost unplanned. So you find in one small area, there are so many public schools there, each one of them with a few learners, and now each one of them requiring equal number of teachers for the teachers to be enough. Because if you have 5 learning areas in a small school, you still need 5 teachers, even when you would put these learners in a neighboring school where there are already 5 teachers and there will be no need for additional teachers.
So just to clarify that, Dr. Manyasa, when you say proliferation of schools, do we mean that there are too many schools cramped up in the same region, or do we have too many schools in general?
We have areas where schools are very far apart. And I know that government will be working on ways to make, to increase numbers of schools in some of those areas, especially in nurseries. You find the closest school is 50 kilometers away, and children as young as 7 years have to board because it's not possible to commute to and from school. But then we have areas of this country, the mainly high potential areas, as they call them, where there's too many schools. For some reason, someone convinced our politicians, members of parliament to be precise, that the easiest development project for you to initiate is build a school. So you are elected for 5 years, you start a school here, you are voted out, the next person who comes does not develop this school because it was started by you, it will give you mileage, starts another one the next door. So TSC is forced to pick one good teacher from here and make them head of this other one. Create a shortage here, put here a few teachers who cannot be optimal in their service delivery. And so we have that problem. We have places where we will have to be bold on how to deal with that proliferation.
Okay. Dr. Mugo, what do you recommend? You've mentioned a few things like the politics of hiring the teachers as one of the major challenges. What do you recommend going forward to deal with this issue of shortage of teachers?
The good thing, Trevor, is that there are many things to celebrate right now. Like one of them, we've done research over the years that shows that staffing areas like Marsabit or Mandera or Wajir, we will have to have ways of training teachers there, because if you get the young people, bring them to Kitui, from Wajir and train them there, they won't go back because everyone desires something better for themselves. And so the starting of new teachers training colleges in those areas, for instance, and incentivizing young people in secondary schools to want to become teachers is one good thing that is happening. So if you go to Mandera now, you'll get an enrollment of more than 700. I was in Wajir over the weekend, a new college, Tarbaj, has students. The other thing is the opportunity to deal with non-viable schools, as Dr. Manyasa is saying. There's just too many schools that are not viable. A secondary school that has an enrollment of less than 300 is not viable, because when you look at the subject distribution and the staffing that has to happen, it means you'll have some teachers that are not hitting the minimum number of lessons per week, which means either we collapse such small schools so that we share teachers, or we have a way of having schools that are near each other share teachers for certain subjects, like the practical subjects that don't have very many lessons. And or also now in this competency-based education, we are having pathways like technical. We have vocational training centers. We have technical vocational colleges that have technical teachers. We have to now break the walls so that we share them. But the other opportunity is motivating teachers and celebrating teachers. We think that a better salary is all that a teacher wants, but teachers also need recognition. We have many teachers that are doing amazing work, but because our default is to look at what is not working, we never get to celebrate and acknowledge the innovation of teachers that are doing really well. So how can communities, how can schools, how can as a society, how can we go back to celebrating those teachers and showcasing the very good practices that can be adopted so that the learning outcomes can be accelerated?
Okay, but then how do you deal with that at a time when there's the localization, I believe that's what it was called, where now you move the teachers around, some of them don't want to go, they're not supposed to be where they were born. Is that something that's sort of shooting yourself in the leg, so to speak, from the Ministry of Education?
There is the technical and the political angle to teacher distribution. Now, the default for anyone, not just for teachers, but even doctors or anyone, is to be nearer where they are your interests. But of course, we know from evidence that when you look at things like absenteeism, it's highest among people that are working at home for obvious reasons. And so the delocalization policy was actually following evidence to try and move teachers to places and facilitate them to be able to focus on where they were. But now the political angle to it, politicians would be happy to have teachers working at home. So that tension between these two, I think, is one that needs to be resolved.
Yeah.
We have allowed politics too much, I think, to interfere with education, and that is why, as Emmanuel says, instead of allowing data and the ministry to establish schools where, depending on the map, we have allowed CDF, to decide where to plant schools, which actually shouldn't be happening.
Okay. And Dr. Sugud, what is the plan for all these three main issues that have been brought up by your fellow panelists? One, skewed distribution of schools, proliferation of schools, and then there's recognition of teachers. So let's start with the first one, skewed distribution.
Thank you, Trevor. I think the question of skewed distribution of teachers and the question of proliferation of schools and motivation of teachers, of course, the issues that touch on the teachers in terms of the human resource and all that, is within the mandate of the Teacher Service Commission. But again, this to some extent also is contributed to by the number of schools that we have. So the Ministry of Education is keen on this kind of data. And data does not lie. We are also looking at how many schools do we have. Like when you look at secondary schools now, we have a total of 9,605 public secondary schools. 2,700 of those schools have an enrollment of less than 150. So then that is a discussion that the ministry will entertain, and in consultation with stakeholders, look at the viability of those institutions. And then we get a way forward in terms of what then do we do with this? Is it serving us well? Are we able to optimize the teachers that we have, these institutions? Of course, without affecting the question of access, ensuring that every learner, every child gets education or accesses education. But we must also be alive to the fact that there are certain schools that may not be viable. It is something that we will look at and we work on. And once that is worked on, Trevor, it therefore means the distribution will definitely improve. The question of possibly motivation and the rest of the issues that come up will be addressed. And we're happy with what my brothers have noted also again, that we now have TTCs in areas that initially we thought were a challenge. And the ministry is very keen on this to ensure that issues of access, issues of retention, and issues of completion are addressed.
Okay. So what is the short-term plan, though, when it comes to simple things like teacher recognition, like what Dr. Rugo is saying? That goes a long way. Instead of just
that's why I've said, well, I don't want to commit here on the issue of teacher recognition because that is the mandate of the commission.
Yes. But is there a conversation around, are you aware of it?
Definitely the commission is working.
Are not viable.
Yes.
You also know some of the gaps that are in the Ministry of Education in general.
What I know the commission has worked on critically is to ensure that the teachers are comfortable. And that is why they are discussing issues of promotion. You saw recently what happened with regard to promotions. And given budget requirements, we also hope that this will be addressed. And the commission, I can assure you, is also working on this to be able to ensure that teachers are comfortable. Because one thing that we do agree is that once the teacher is comfortable, then it translates into successful curriculum delivery. And this definitely touches on the performance of the learners, because the learners are also motivated when the teachers are motivated, when the teachers are present in class, when the attendance is good, and even the attendance and performance by learners also improves.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's on the teachers' staffing. And Dr. Manyasa, you also mentioned gaps in infrastructure. What did you find? So
in terms of gaps in infrastructure, it's mainly for specialized learning areas. Labs are inadequate. Computer labs are mostly not there in most of our secondary schools. As per the report that we are releasing, just about 33% of the schools of our current secondary schools are actually offering computer studies by the start of this year. That tells you that those are the schools which are ready to be able to offer computer studies come January next year. And computer studies under CBE is now compulsory learning area.
And only 33% are ready.
33% are currently offering. So those are the ones we can say confidently are ready, because they already have computer labs, they have computers for students' use, and they have teachers who have been teaching computer studies. So they're ready. The rest require capacitation to be able to be ready by the end of the year. So that is one of those gaps that I can point out. We can point out the issue of labs, especially among junior schools. Majority of junior school learners are struggling to access lab facilities. And that is another challenge, because our aspiration and the aspiration of CBE is to transition 60% of the learners from junior school to STEM pathways in senior. And for us to get there, we need them to be exposed to these facilities in junior school, to be able to access labs, to be able to access enough numbers of STEM teachers who can then prepare them for transition into STEM pathways. And that is a gap. the other gap is around the new learning areas that are being introduced. Now we have music. For a very long time, government was not absorbing music teachers, so a lot of students never enrolled to train as music teachers. Home science, areas where government had not been posting, so people shunned to train in them. Areas like art and design, these are areas which have been introduced, but where we now need staffing that is not there currently. We need those design rooms if you're going to be able to offer art and design. So those are gaps that we can be able to see in infrastructure and in personnel at the same time, to be able to prepare, especially our senior schools, to be ready come January next year to offer the different pathways. All schools are ready for the humanities pathway. That is straightforward. All schools are ready.
Yeah.
Many schools are ready for STEM, but not all. Majority of sub-county schools are not ready to be STEM schools because majority of them don't have science facilities and majority of them don't have STEM teachers. As per study we did last year in November, 35% of our junior schools did not have a single STEM teacher. I know that has been corrected by the recruitment early this year, but recall, we're recruiting those STEM teachers in those schools January this year when these kids are going to grade 9. They cannot be ready to transition to STEM after missing a STEM teacher in grade 7 and 8, and they get a STEM teacher in January of grade 9. They will not be ready to transition to STEM. I feel that there is still a lot to go on to make our junior schools the foundation for STEM education, which is where we are trying to move as a country.
Okay, we'll come to that in just a short while. Let me take a quick break here. When we come back, we'll find out now what are the solutions to this and how do we now then leverage on public-private partnerships, especially when you transition to STEM and AI, for example, because that's where we're heading now as a country. What is the plan? We'll keep your views coming at Trevor Mbija at Citizen TV Kenya. Use the hashtag Monday Report. See you in just a bit.
Tunaingia vijijini, mijini na hata jijini kukuletea taarifa mchana kutwa. Usiku tunaketi kitako, tunadadavua tukichanganua taarifa na makala muhimu yanayokuhusu wewe na familia yako. Ungana na Bernard Ngozi kwenye Open Forum Political Show kuanzia saa 4 usiku hadi dakika zake kila siku ya wiki kwenye
Tunazunguka kote kote mchana kutwa kukuletea taarifa na matokeo ya habari kutoka pembe zote za ulimwengu. Jioni tunaweka mduara wa kujadili taarifa zizo hizo kwa mapana na marefu. Ungana nasi kila siku ya wiki kwenye matukio ya siku saa 2 jioni kwenye Sound.
Now we're focusing on the gaps in infrastructure and funding as well. And Dr. Ruga was just bringing you on this, on the issue of STEM that has been raised by Dr. Emmanuel Manyasa. In STEM, of course, is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. What is the possible solutions to this now? And how then do we leverage on public-private partnerships to have more schools be ready for STEM courses? Because if only 33% seem to be ready, that means 67% are not.
Yeah, the one opportunity I see is again in the sharing of facilities. So you will find that the plan now is to sink a lot of resources in, for instance, providing labs in for junior schools, because that's where the gap is biggest. And yet, 69% of the secondary schools that Dr. Sugut has talked about are sub-county, day schools. And these schools are across the fence of a junior school or sharing even the same compound. But you'll find the push to construct yet, other. So I think we are rushing too much to brick and mortar without looking at how to leverage the available resources. If the available science labs nationally were to be mapped and shared, then we wouldn't have to construct 50% of what now I know is planned to construct. So the question is, how do we look at the workshops available in the vocational, in the technical training centers, and how can they be used by the senior schools that are taking pathways? How do we get facilities shared where they are within good distance? If we figure out elements of child protection and all that, because you have younger children, and bigger children. The other opportunity is technology. I think we are not moving fast enough to adopt technology, and it presents such a huge opportunity, because a lot of what we struggled with, during my time in a lab to learn how to do, technology can resolve a huge proportion of that. So what is the intersection between technology and STEM, and how can we leverage? Because it is way cheaper to get one, simulator and all that than building, concrete and all that. And the other, as you said, is bringing in other players. I think government looking at ways of incentivizing the private sector, so that private sector can come in. There we have seen, for instance, good innovations like infrastructure bonds, government issuing, so that we may raise money for infrastructure. Why wouldn't we have an education bond? This is what people are asking, that can where private sector can put in money, but we know there is also a way of getting interest and benefiting from it. And you'll have even many Kenyans getting into such a bond. We have seen establishment of a housing levy. Why wouldn't we have a CBE levy? Because some of these challenges are just transitional. It's not something that we'll need to always be doing. Like now, if we had a CBE levy where we are training our teachers seriously and tooling them so that they have the skills that they need to get this new curriculum, get results, then we just need to do that for 4 or 5 years, and that's it. And we can get back. So I think there is opportunity here to do something really great for the country by looking at ways that are outside of the box. Because if we just look at what Treasury is allocating year in, year out, that money is not enough. And we know from the huge budget that comes, a lot of it is not even disbursed because of shortage of funding. But there are other ways of opening the space, especially to private sector, to communities, to contribute to parents. If parents understood that if I did this for my child, these are the kind of results I would get, I'm sure many parents would actually invest in the things that their schools are struggling with.
And Dr. Sugut, what is the plan to bridge this deficit?
Thank you, Trevor. I think one thing I want to say is that the ministry is alive to the fact that STEM is very critical. And now we are going for transition, and we have successfully been able to transition children from grade 6 to grade 7. And now we are working on transition from grade 9 to grade 10, which is senior school. And the data that we do have now is that we have a total of 1,369 secondary schools that require laboratories. So we have worked with partners, particularly World Bank, to ensure that we put up these labs before January next year, to be able to ensure that the STEM is well taken care of. So we are going to put up a total of 1,650 laboratories in the 1369 schools. That is one. Now, we arrive at this by looking at the curriculum design, which is actually the syllabus, and finding out what is it that a school requires, particularly when you look at junior that my brother has talked about. We look at the curriculum design in terms of integrated science. What does it entail and what does it require? And therefore, there are several other options that we have encouraged schools to be able to pursue. For example, the mobile labs that are being done by the Kenya School Equipment Production Unit, SEPU. And to be able to acquire a mobile lab for a junior school is about 200,000. And that is taken care of in the capitation that we have given to those institutions. And therefore, we have encouraged them to be able to work on that, because when you look at the curriculum design and look at the topics that are being taught in that particular curriculum design, in that syllabus, it is possible to be able to address that. But even more importantly, the question of technology is very critical. We have our whole institution, the Center for Mathematics, Technology Education in Africa, CEMASTEA, which has already worked on virtual labs to be able to bridge the gap in terms of the requirements for laboratories and to ensure that STEM education is well taken care of. And we want Trevor to invite you even for the symposium that will be there, I think from tomorrow, so that you are able to also appreciate what is happening. But again, we are keen on looking at any other situation that arises so that we are also able to address it. We are aware that there are new subjects in terms of STEM with regard to issues of electricity, issues of building construction, metalwork, woodwork. And what we have done in this transition that we are working on, which is largely online, is to ensure that schools that were offering metalwork increase the capacity in terms of the number of students, because they have the equipment, they have a teacher who will be able to teach them. So senior schools will declare capacity. And in terms of what it is that they're able to do, we ask them to increase the capacity in areas that other schools are not offering, so that we are able to take children in that particular subject. For example, in Joro Boys, we expect them to admit more students for metalwork, woodwork, because that's what they offer. We expect Mangu High School, for example, to be able to admit more students for aviation, because that is what they offer. So we are working on this to be able to ensure that this is improved, and we are on top of things. And as I did say, we are not worried, because we are on top of it, and definitely we'll be able to deliver on this.
It doesn't seem like that, Dr. Sugud, because first you said that you have 1,369 secondary schools.
Yes.
And you're looking at 1,650 laboratories.
Yes.
What informed that number? And second, how do you ensure that these students who are in grade 9, who were not exposed to STEM in 7 and 8, then catch up, whereas they didn't even have the teachers to begin with?
Well, you see, the numbers that I have here are out of data that we collected. We did survey all the secondary schools in the country across the 47 counties, the 9,605 of them. And we looked at enrollment vis-a-vis the requirements in terms of the number of labs they need. Now, that is why you realize we have a number without labs at 1369. But you'll realize the number of labs required are more than that, because you would easily imagine that it is one lab per school. But there are those ones that require more than one. That is why we are going to 1,650. And this is something that will continue every year, because as I told you, this is something that the ministry is ready to work on. And I can assure you by January, these laboratories will be ready, because we have made arrangements. You remember we also were able to put up classrooms for grade 9. And with proper planning, which we are working on, it is possible to deliver these laboratories, because we really understand also that we need to transition out of the 1,128,000 572 grade 9 learners. We need to transition about 700,000 of them to STEM. And STEM will be in form of pure sciences. It will be in form, that is biology, chemistry, mathematics, and physics. The question of applied sciences in terms of agriculture, home science, computer studies, and even in terms of technical studies, things to do with aviation, woodwork, metalwork, building and construction, biomechanics, and all that. So that is something that we are alive to, so that we are able to work on that.
Dr. Manyasa, are we saying that at this particular point that there's a cohort that will go without the requisite training or teaching, so to speak? Because if there are those in grade 9 and 7 and 8, they were never taken through STEM, we can't take them back. I mean, it is what it is. Are we saying that there's a cohort that will go without the proper training?
Yeah, I'll come back to this question, but allow me to contribute to the question that my colleagues have contributed to around what can we do to bridge the gap. From the data that we have seen, government expenditure in education is 54% of the total cost of education in the country. And parents are contributing 38% of the total cost of education. And development partners and other philanthropies are contributing about 8% of the money that is funding education currently. I think that one key thing that we must not miss is to urge government in its leadership role to create a framework for collaboration of all the other actors in funding education, so that there is a transparent approach to say, this is how much we will need for education this year. This is how much can come from the public coffers, and this is the gap. And then incentivize all other actors, parents, communities, because you don't have to have a child in school to be interested in what happens in the school. You could be interested even when you don't have a child. Actually, you should be interested even if you don't have a child in school. And then coordinate the private sector and philanthropists, private and public, so that at the start of any given year, we know that this will come from government, and whatever comes from government, these are the priority areas that government will fund. And then the areas that remain are the areas where we are encouraging other actors to be able to put in resources. I think that framework is needed to create room for effective collaboration. As it is right now, because of lack of that framework, there are some cases where resources are put in education and they duplicate what already government is doing, and that leads to some wastage of resources that are already scarce. So I think that framework is necessary and urgent. The second thing that I will turn to is to your question. Do we have children who, to some extent, we have sacrificed? Yes. We cannot deny that because of the manner in which we rolled out CBE. We rolled out CBE before we were ready, and because we have been playing catch up in terms of addressing the needs of the sector, we have children who have inevitably been victims. The challenge that we face and which we must confront now is to say, can we make sure these children struggled through primary with teachers being retooled over the weekend and coming to school to teach them on Monday. They have struggled through junior because we moved them before we hired teachers. Can we do everything possible to make sure that their senior school experience is very good? So that whichever pathway they will be in, their stay and learning through senior school delivers optimal value, and they're able, those who can catch up on any area that they missed, they're able to catch up, so that they're not sacrificial through
lumps throughout
primary, junior, and then senior.
Okay.
Because we can't afford to lose a whole generation of young Kenyans like that. If we lose them, we will have messed our own futures, because these are the doctors who treat us in old age. If we don't teach them, they will be doctors still, but they will not be doctors who are capable of keeping us alive after retirement. We retire to our graves. So we need that sorted out, in my view. And one thing that I need to raise that we haven't touched, and I am fearful that we might end the show without talking about, is ECD.
ECD. That's why
foundational learning is super critical. It is what determines what children will do for the rest of their time in school. And we need to start to discuss the question of the D in ECD, because what counties have been implementing is ECE, early childhood education. They have not implemented the development component. The reason ECD was devolved was because health was devolved, and they needed to go together. The development component that is health and nutrition, which is missing in our early childhood education, early childhood development education. We need to have a conversation around that D in ECD.
Okay, and then let's talk about that just now. And Dr. Rugo, let me bring in on this. Again, I would like to hear from your recommendations. How then do we fix the ECDE challenge that we have right now? Or what have you seen that needs to be intervened on, and what are the possible solutions?
There is a huge opportunity because we have 47,000 early childhood and development education centers across the 47 counties. And this is huge. So it's such a huge opportunity if we were to embrace it. We have, around, I think, 78,000 teachers, and conditions for teachers have been improving. The one thing is for, I think, Kenyans to understand the importance of this stage, as Emmanuel is saying. If, as a parent, you are to invest in something, it is the first 1,000 days. So from birth to 3 years. That time is so critical for brain development, because children that lose on this stage, actually, most of them never catch up. And so there are things that parents ought to know they need to be doing. First of all is feeding the baby as well. You are contributing to their education. When you speak to babies and they develop language early, you are contributing to education. When you do things around emotional balancing, when you can ensure that your baby is laughing more than they are crying, you are contributing to lessening trauma in society. And so, but because the way we grew up was that age ni kucheza tu, so you never even bother, and the poorest and the worst motivated teachers are the ones we take to that level, yet it should be the other way around. The foundation, because this stage is a foundation, it's like just a building, that the most important thing that you pay attention to is not the roof, is the foundation. So if Kenyans understood that, then parents can be able to prioritize these simple things that they can be doing on a day-to-day basis, but also government in terms of improving the preparation of teachers. A lot of these teachers don't know, for instance, how to use play-based learning. There is still a lot of memorizing, that is still happening, which is really sad, because in CBE now we ought to have transitioned. But when you look at how children are still learning, you pass through these ECD centers, they're still spending a lot of time rote learning, repeating these things over and over again. And yet there are now methods of teaching that we know are different. So how we can invest...
What is causing that? Is it that the teachers are not trained well enough, or is it just a mentality of the past that still is ingrained in the teaching fraternity?
It is both. It is both that teachers teach the way they were taught, and we haven't invested enough to show them possibilities. Like one thing that we ought to do is to teach teachers the way we want them to teach. That one we haven't transitioned enough. We teach teachers, theoretically, knowledge and all that, and we want them to be on the floor with children playing. So we ought to have now a reform, and government is already reforming this, but we are not there yet, that teachers have to be taught the way they will teach. And so the people that teach teachers are carrying a lot of responsibility, and I know there is a lot of movement happening. One good thing that has happened, for instance, is the Kenya National Examinations Council is continuing to use e-assessments, and so moving assessment and examination from pen paper to doing e-assessments, because through that we can be able to access data immediately and be able to work backwards to see what are the areas that these teachers need to be trained in. So the innovation like that NEC is having and other places in government can actually be scaled up. And if we adopted these things, we can actually rapidly move so that in 2 years, a lot of these issues are resolved.
Yeah, I bring in Dr. Sugut on this. And Dr. Manyasa is raising an issue, saying the development in the D, in the ECD, which stands for development, we are not achieving. What is the plan for that? And Dr. Rugo is saying that the teaching pedagogy is still stuck in the past, that they're still reciting the same things in as much as we've already moved to CBE. What is the plan to rectify that?
Well, maybe, Trevor, one thing that we need to recognize in this space is that ECD is devolved, and whereas the national government is responsible for curriculum and policy, the rest of the things are taken care of by the county governments.
Yeah.
But it is true, when we transition to a competency-based education, what we are looking at is, in terms of a vision, a citizenry that is engaged, empowered, and more importantly, ethical. But even before that, we are looking at the teacher being a facilitator as opposed to being the source of knowledge. So in this case, the teacher is expected to provide a conducive environment for the child to be able to discover things on their own as the environment is being worked on. And there's a lot of retooling that has gone on, because what actually changes when a teacher is trained from college is the question of the methodology. So now the concern here is the issue of methodology that we need possibly to work on thoroughly. And maybe I would request my brothers here to carry out another research, particularly on ECD, to see then, are there gaps that possibly we need to fill? Because it has now taken some time. Our first cohort is now in grade 9. And so we expect our teachers to have kind of acclimatized with how do you deliver this kind of curriculum, where we are looking about competencies that children are supposed to acquire, issues to do with learning to learn, self-efficacy, are we achieving that critical thinking and problem solving? Are we able from that foundational level to provide an environment that ensures that learners or children are able to capture these things and are able to make learning fun in the process? So possibly maybe we in the next session we need a research so that we can now look at how do we look at that, and possibly the question of nutrition, because again nutrition is very critical as you have these children develop.
Okay, Manyasa, I think you captured most of part of that in the report. And what do you recommend when it comes to ECD?
So there are still a few gaps. One of the major gaps that I think exists that is a disincentive to ECD centers and the county governments that are managing them, is that there is no accountability mechanism. When a child has taken 3 years in an ECD center and they are transitioning to grade 1, we don't know whether they have benefited in any way from being in that ECD center, or they have just been there for the 3 years and now they are being transitioned. So the primary schools receive children who are at totally different levels of preparation for school. So their school readiness is not known when they're joining primary. And so we need a mechanism that will enable us to assess. I know there are tools being developed, but we need to expedite the development of those tools to be able to assess children who are leaving ECD, to know how ready, how prepared they are for primary education. I think that is important to create some sort of accountability for the time spent in the ECD centers. But I think that we need this conversation with county governments and the national government that provides the policy framework to try and standardize what children are experiencing as early childhood development education across the country, because there are gaps. between counties, depending on how committed the government of a particular county is in recruiting, in motivating, and even in managing the ECD teachers. And many of them are focused on providing buildings that sometimes are so good that children don't want to move from there to primary school, but they are not providing the software that is needed in those centers, for those centers to effectively prepare children for primary education. I think that is critical. In many parts of the country, especially the ASALs, children are going to ECD when they are past the recommended age, mostly because of insecurity that makes going to school at very early age difficult. We need to think about how do we stop treating those regions the same way we treat areas where an ECD center is a few meters away from the house, so that the children there do not continue to be marginalized and forced to either just grow up at home and then go to primary when you have reached of age, or enroll in ECD when they're past the age. Because that is happening a lot in ASALs, where ECD centers are far from where people live. Maybe we need models that can be able to serve the communities from where they are, to enable uniformity in the quality of ECD that is accessed, and to give every child an opportunity to participate.
Okay. Dr. Mugo, is there a direct correlation between school facilities and learning outcomes?
Yes.
Because there's something you mentioned earlier on which I found interesting, that it's better to have more teachers than bad infrastructure, rather than have no teachers in good infrastructure.
No, even though that the teacher we said is the single most highest, but there are also other drivers of learning, and infrastructure is one of them. We know that where there are facilities, where there are good learning materials and resources, the infrastructure is conducive. Where these things converge, then we see learning happening. When you go to places where the infrastructure is poor, they don't have power, if it is STEM, they don't have a science laboratory, then also very little learning happens. And it's because of many things that are linked to infrastructure. When you think about things like adverse weather, it's a rainy season and the classroom is raining, or it's very hot and you are under a tree, then for sure learning is affected. But also the motivation of teachers, when you have a good facility, it's just like having an office where you have a nice chair and a desk. So teachers are also motivated by good infrastructure. So even though we say infrastructure is not the single most important thing, it's not the most important, but it's also very important, and especially the desire that we can have government schools that look the same everywhere. That I think we will say as a country we are doing well when you go to this school and you don't need to be told this is a government school. Like when you go to countries like India, public schools look the same. Even the color, the way the gate is, it's actually equitable standards. And I know we have standards of quality. We are far from there. And so infrastructure for sure ought also to be prioritized because it is contributing a lot to whether children are learning or not.
All right. There's a lot of feedback that's coming through. Let me bring back some of them, and then we can respond to some of them here that are coming straight from the people. And then we'll talk about inclusion of PWDs. I think that's an important subject that we shouldn't leave out, some of the effective models and best practices for that. But let's bring up some of the feedback first and get a quick reaction on this. Crispinus Adams says, I believe that education is overfunded, but the problem is management. How can we fund ghost schools for 14 years when there is shortage of funding? We need to relook at the itemized budget to ensure that more funds go to schools. Quick reaction on that, Manyasa, is that true? Is it overfunded, or we should get good to give that? Because it's true, the Auditor General had said that there were some ghost schools that received capitation.
So if ghost schools received money, they took away from learners who needed that money in other schools. It's not that they took surplus money.
Okay.
So we can't say the education is overfunded.
Yeah.
Ghost schools may have taken money, but they took away from schools that deserved.
Okay.
So there's no overfunding in relation to that.
But Dr. Sugut, how could that possibly happen?
Well, thank you, Trevor. I think I'm also looking for this ghost school. Because, Trevor, I can tell you the process of giving capitation is a tedious one. So when you talk of a ghost school, we would also be interested at least really to lay our hands on it, because how does it get there? Because you see, there's a process that you follow. And possibly that will also help us be able to look at our system thoroughly. Because really, funding a school is a procedure. So because the school is registered and then they request, then the school has a unique identifier that we go for when we are funding. And there are certain stages that we do follow. That is why if you give money to the wrong account for some reason, it is possible, that money has to come back. So really, we need to help ourselves and say, okay, where are these ghost schools?
So are you saying the Auditor General was not being factual? Because this was 6 days ago. First of all, are you aware that she said that more than 16 million has gone to ghost schools?
I will also personally look for these ghost schools. Because,
as the ministry, are you aware that that is a statement from the Auditor General?
Yeah, we are aware that was raised, but we are also following it because we would not want to lose public money.
I think I believe they are ghost schools.
They are there.
But if we have ghost policemen, we have ghost doctors, we have reached a place, Trevor, in this country where we have to now seriously know that we are not doing right. CBE has values, has stipulated the 8 values that children should learn, and one of them is integrity. So we are struggling, to get teachers to teach integrity when on TV every day there are ghost workers, there are all these things. So for me, values, for this society is what ought to be prioritized, because I would believe that Dr. Sugut doesn't know about the ghost schools, but I'm sure somebody watching us knows. So how do we reach a point where we are able to talk honestly as Kenyans, because these are our children? We have money being stolen from people that are sick, that are bedridden, and that person has no conscience that whatever you are doing is actually killing people. So as Emmanuel says, this person who takes money into their pocket that ought to belong to children in Turkana or in Kwale somewhere, then a school cannot change society. A school just mirrors the society it belongs to. So it will be a lot of effort in vain if we are trying to teach children values and we as adults out here, we are not practicing them. So I think we need to have an honest national conversation on whether we are serious about making progress and using the resources we have to contribute to the development that we all desire.
Okay. Let me bring up some of the feedback that is still here. There's quite a lot of them. Let's see if we can go through them really quick and get quick reactions. But Michael says it's now clear and evident that CBC transferred most tasks to parents, financial and classwork, e.g. homework, etc. At the same time, most parents don't really know what to do on various occasions. What can they do to change this scenario? Quick reaction, Dr. Sugut.
Thank you. I think that may have happened when we started, because the teachers had not been retooled on how to address the assignments that were there. But actually, it's not the teacher, the parent who is supposed to do the homework. Because now, when the parent does the homework and the teacher assesses, so who is the teacher assessing? Is it the parent or the child? And we have done a lot of retooling so that teachers now are able to take care of that. And then in terms of cost, again, as I did say earlier, even in the capitation that we give to schools, there is a vote head on CBC items to enable the teachers to be able to purchase certain requirements if they want to demonstrate certain things in class. So that should be taken care of.
Okay. Let's bring up more feedback. Unless Manyasa, you want to respond on that at the same time? The involvement of teachers and parents in this? Okay. Yongo says the discussion on the state of education is timely. The ministry knows these persistent gaps, teacher shortages, delayed capitation, etc. But how willing is it to fix them? Are political versus technical tensions widening the gaps? How do we move past the gaps from the opportunities shared by the panelists? How do we move from these gaps, Dr. Mugo?
I think providing education is not just the role of government. Government is a big part of the system, but we all are, as Emmanuel said. When you go, one of the things, for instance, that is contributing to the wide gaps is school leadership. Whenever there is a well-performing school or a poorly performing school, the one thing we know is constant, is who leads that school. So the conversation around who is leading our schools, I think needs to be examined, because we have very good school leaders, principals and head teachers, but we also have people that can't even teach, leave alone lead schools, and now they have been given that responsibility, and they are very busy running down schools. So how we also, just as we focus on the teacher, how we focus on the school leader, because the school leader is the reconciler of all these things we are talking about, community resources. It's the head teacher, is the principal who has to open that space to other people. Okay. But I think the other one I said is the political capture.
Yeah.
We have put the politician in this country to be the most important profession, to be whatever. And that, I think, is a mistake. And I don't know what role Parliament can play. Because if this continues, that everything is aligned to serve politics, then we will never be able to close this gap. So there are all these things happening, but also funding model. The funding model we've been having historically is per child capitation, which now means that the schools, the ones that are not developed and they have low populations, they fall, further away. So also how we can have differentiated funding, new equity-based models for funding, and I know that Dr. Sugut can talk to what government is saying. If we continue on this momentum, and all of us do what we can do at our level, not just pointing a finger at government, we can make much faster progress.
Okay, let me bring up more feedback as well as we wind up on this conversation. Jane Mumo says, what concrete steps is the Ministry of Education taking to bridge the digital divide between urban and rural learners and ensure equal access to digital tools, training and connectivity, especially in the rise of AI? Dr. Sugut?
Thank you. The ministry is very keen on this, and currently we are carrying out an assessment of the institutions to be able to ensure that we establish the issues of connectivity, how many schools are connected to the grid. If they don't have, they're not connected to the grid, how else are they getting the source of power? And what subjects are they even teaching in terms of computer and the others, so that we are able to work on that. So that is a work in progress. And possibly we also need to understand that we are keen on this. That is the reason for which we have talked about virtual labs by semester. And we are working on ensuring that even the kind of selection that we have done, that the children in junior school have done this time around, is purely online. Because we want to empower our teachers, we want to empower our field officers to ensure that they are able to access this. And necessity is the mother of invention. Once we do this, a few of them will have a few challenges, but it is through these challenges that they are able to improve.
Okay.
And the ministry is very keen on that. And even not only capacity building, but also the question of providing some of these devices even to our field officers to support them to be able to work on this.
All right, let's bring up the feedback and wind up on this. And Sir Nixon says, will it be possible to change subject combinations after a learner joins senior school? You can just write down some of these questions so that when I give you a chance for closing remarks, you can respond to them as we wind up. Sir Nixon says, number 2, why are parents being given very short deadlines after announcements of activities like that of accessing the portal to select subjects? Okay. See the next one here. Gabiwa Kasiaka says, why is the rate of sexually abused students by their teachers rising? Kenya lacks strong and enforced safeguarding policies to protect our children from sexual orientation. Okay, we'll talk about that. And Bore Collins says, many schools are struggling to stay afloat. Has the government truly prioritized education funding? Most have never received even half the capitation, yet they are told to operate normally and retain students in school. Really doesn't match the directives. Reality doesn't match the directive. That's what you said. And Besk says, sincerely speaking, there's a lot that needs to be done to improve the level of education in most public schools. The biggest scare is the current implementation of the CBE, which now enters grade 10 next year. There's a lot that needs to be done. Dr. Manyas, I'll come to you for closing remarks, and you can wind up on this conversation reaction to what the people have said. And also on the PWDs, how do we ensure that, what are some of the best practices to ensure that there's PWD inclusion in schools? Just the other day here in Citizen TV, we featured a story where Kabarnet School for the Blind were complaining that they do not have enough resources to bridge the gap for the Braille need for the students who are visually impaired. What is the best practice to ensure PWD inclusion in this education system?
So first of all, the organization I work for does not embrace the term inclusion for a very simple reason that presupposes some people have a right to include others. The education system should work justly for every Kenyan child, because that is our constitutional aspiration. That's what we have promised Kenyans, young Kenyans and future young Kenyans. So whenever we look at the results, and you see this when KCSE results come out, if we can just focus on secondary school, all special schools are national schools. But if you compare the results of other schools, the gap is like day and night. That gap does not reflect inability of the children with special needs. It reflects inadequate resourcing of the special schools to be able to bridge, to meet their needs, to meet their special needs, so that they can perform to their best and be able to merge the performance of learners in the other national schools. So it is actually a major call to us all to ask ourselves, and a lot of people tell you, oh, it is expensive to invest in assistive technologies that these children with special needs need to be able to optimize their academic performance. The question is simple. What is easier and what is cheaper? Invest in these assistive devices and technologies that they need to be able to optimize their learning outcomes, or have them supported for the rest of their life as dependents? Is it cheaper to support someone as a dependent for the rest of their life, or invest in what they need to learn so that they can be independent citizens like anybody else? And I think, to me, the answer is clear. We just need to do the right thing. There is a point that one of the viewers has raised on the issue of sexual abuse of children in schools, and it's very important that we talk about it because it's now a current issue. Part of what is causing that is that some principals have turned our schools into some dark hole, where you take your child and you'll only be able to come in when they call you. Otherwise, you can't even visit and see your own child in school. You have a child studying in a school in Mombasa, you work for the ministry like my brother, you have gone to Mombasa for work, but you can't say, let me stop by and see my daughter or my son before I go back to Nairobi. They tell you it's not a visiting day. We will call you. Because those schools have been turned into some black hole. We do research in schools, and we have gone to secondary schools where we have been denied access, even when we have the letter from the PS we have a letter from the county director of education, and sometimes even when the county director of education calls the principal to say these people are authorized to come to your school, we are still denied access. And those are the schools. And one of them right now is actually, the learners are at home because of this issue. One of the schools that deny people access. So when principals turn schools into black holes, where the community knows nothing that goes on in the school, parents of children who are there are not allowed access, then that becomes an environment where if there is a sex pest, they can thrive. Because this is a dark hole where learners who are young people and vulnerable are on their own. They don't have an opportunity to interact and be able to share and express the trauma that they may be experiencing. And I think that is something that needs to change. Schools need to be open. We understand the responsibility of principals to ensure discipline in school and protect learners from interference from people outside, but parents should have access. The Parents Association should have access. Organizations that are duly authorized from the ministry should have access. They shouldn't be denied. There are stories out here that we have teachers who are on the brink of suicide because a teacher was involved with a student, the principal got to know, and the principal has turned that teacher into a cash cow. Tell him, oh, TS have heard of this, we need to go and talk to them. A teacher runs to Mwalimu, takes a loan, the principal eats, continues to monitor, the fellow pays the loan. When the loan is finished, he says, now they have brought another officer there who is managing your file, unless we talk to him, this matter can be bad. So the teacher is perennially on loans that are eaten by the principal because he was involved with a student
in the veil
inappropriately. Instead of the principal helping the ministry and TSC to identify this person and get them out of the school so that they can stop abusing children, they cover them and milk them. There is need to open up our schools.
Okay. Dr. Mugo, your closing remarks in reaction to what they've
There was the question around parents, tasks to parents and what parents can do. The one single most important thing that parents can do is spending time with children. Institutionalizing children is a terrible thing for our society, and a lot of the struggles we have with young people now is because they brought each other in boarding schools. The parents were not there.
They brought up each other.
Yes, so when we remove a child and some are young, and we know there are circumstances, but those that are circumstantial, that really there was no other way, or this child could not have at home, that's less than 10%. But I think it became a culture that sending children to boarding schools is stylish, or we only considered academic performance and ignored the holistic development, the character development, and so spending time with your child, like now we are closing schools in August. This is the time for those parents that can, I know many of them can't, take leave. And you don't need to do anything, to tell them anything, just spending time. We know from research that makes a huge contribution. The other one, follow up. Even if you can't do the work that they are doing, some of it is much more advanced than we can do, just follow up with them every day. What are you learning? What are the issues? Discuss with them other issues, and even introducing them to what you do, to challenges you face. That way we can be able to bring children. So there is a lot parents can do beyond just academic performance, because academic performance is not the most important thing to a young person. But holistic development, these balanced exposure, these are things that only parents can do and schools can't do. So I am of the opinion that if every parent understood what their role is, even things that like core competencies that Dr. Sugut referred to, things like problem solving. Problems are in daily life. They are not in the CBC. They're in daily life. And so these things like working with each other, being polite, modeling this to our children as parents, actually, we are contributing to a better society.
Okay. Dr. Sugut? Closing remarks.
Thank you so much, Trevor. I think for me, I am happy that we've been able to discuss this. The ministry definitely will not allow this kind of sexual abuse of children in schools. It is not a good thing. And we're asking our field officers to be vigilant and to ensure that they also visit the schools. And if there are issues, let the children discuss with their teachers. The principals of schools also should be able to discuss this and be able to be available to the children if there are any issues so that they are able to address them. The question of BWDs that was raised, the government is putting up a center at Kise, the Kenya Institute of Special Education, to help in the assembling of assistive devices so that can help in the process to ensure that the PWDs are not left behind. There was a question on the strict deadlines and whether children can be able to make changes when they get to senior school with regard to subject combinations. It is true the timelines are strict and because time is a resource. But of course, I want to assure everyone that no learner will be left out in the selection because it's only that we are running very strict timelines, but of course we will take care to ensure that no learner is left out. When these children get to grade 10, and in the first term, they feel like possibly there is a subject that they're not very comfortable with, or they want to add another one, they are able to do that within that institution. We will give that provision to the heads of institutions to be able to do that. Because one thing, Trevor, is that we really want to tap into the talent of every child. It is important to identify, but more important to really nurture that talent, because we would want children to fit into what it is that they are talented to do, what it is that they are happy to do, so that learning is fun.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, gentlemen, for making time this evening. We've extended this conversation because it's an important conversation, the state of education. We haven't even finished it, so we'll bring it back again at some point, interact with the report and see what they're saying. Dr. William Sugut, Director, Secondary Education, Ministry of Education, thank you for making time. Dr. John Mugo, CEO, Zizi Afrik, and Dr. Emmanuel Manyasa, Executive Director of SAWA Agenda. Both of them co-authored that report. Interact with it and see what they're saying, plus their recommendations. We'll continue having this conversation because it is important to the public. On behalf of everyone who made this possible, we say good night and God bless. Thanks for watching.